Здравейте! В новия епизод на Small Talk ще ви срещнем с истинска музикална легенда. Lennart Östlund е звукорежисьор, продуцент и микс инженер в култовото студио, основано от ABBA. Там работи от самото му откриване до закриването, цели 44 години. Той е човека записал последния албум на Led Zeppelin. Работил е с Genesis, с Тина Търнър, с Rammstein, с музиканти от всякакъв калибър. А днес е в България. Защо? Хайде да разберем. Hi Lennart, nice to meet you here in Bulgaria. Why are you coming now in Bulgaria?
Mostly because of the Spike musical event up in Plovdiv.
Yes. What will you do there?
I should speak for 1 hour. And that's funny, you go for a long trip, stay for many days, and then you speak for 1 hour. But I would like to speak about Sweden and the studio that I worked with, Polar, because that's a part of the musical history, and I want people to know about it.
World musical history, not only.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
It's legendary.
Yeah.
I hope we'll speak about Polar.
Yes.
Today too. Have you been in Bulgaria before?
Last year at Plovdiv.
And how did you find Plovdiv and Bulgaria?
Very nice town and a bit different.
From what?
From where I normally stay in Europe or things. It reminds me a bit about Hungary and Prague and things. When I was there 20 years ago. It has an Eastern charm, but it's still in the future. Yeah, different. I like when things are different.
Yes.
Not the common way.
Did you have the chance to hear some Bulgarian music last year when you were here?
Bands, yes,
Bands?
yes. They were performing a lot of bands.
Do you like something? Do you remember something from them?
There were so many bands, and the bands were from different countries. I can't remember the names. I can't even remember names of recordings I've done myself.
There are so many.
No, not that. It's not important. The name is not important.
Yes, but the sound.
The sound and the lyrics, but the name of the song.
Yes.
When the name of the people drops out, the disc is full.
The disc is full.
Yeah.
Okay. Your life and career are closely connected to this iconic studio, where you spent 44 years?
Yes, I was
Right.
doomed for 44 years.
Oh, that's a lot of time.
That was Polar Studios.
Yes, Polar.
But I started, the first studio sessions was 1971 or something. That was a Swedish radio company I was recording, and I also worked at the EMI studio in Stockholm.
How many years from?
1971, and I started at Polar in 1978.
Yes, 8 years before that
Yes,
you started
the first
your
time.
career.
You can't really say, because 1975 I didn't know if I was an engineer or a musician or just nobody. When I was employed at Polar Studios, I didn't know if I was going to last, because it's so difficult to get into the industry, to the music business. For one example, there is a photo when I was employed before the studio was built, and then was opened the 18th of May 1978. And there are the ABBA, the owners of the studio, Stig Andersson, the manager of Polar International, and there was Michael Tretov, the engineer of ABBA, and Leif Maser, my boss and engineer, and I was standing there also. And the photographer says to me, Lennart, can you get out of the picture?
Oh.
That's because he said, we don't know if you're going to last in this business, so we don't want you in the picture if you like is in the picture, and then you work for 3 months and never be seen.
Yes.
But I lasted for 44 years, and that's more than anyone else did at the Polar Studios.
Maybe this isn't your best memory from then.
No, but I accepted because I didn't know if I was going to be there.
Yes.
It was difficult to get clients with the 2 best engineers in Sweden and me, 22 years old.
Yes. How did you start working there? How it happened before, you say before you were invited before the studio was built?
Yes, because everyone, as a musician, I had a band, symphonical rock.
Yes.
And I really wanted to work with music, and the best thing would be to be working in a studio. So when I went to school, I went 4 years in high school for an engineering, electronic engineering. And then you had to do something in Sweden that I didn't want to do, the military service.
Oh, yes.
Destroyed the thing with the band, but I built things. I built like compressors, flanges, phases, echoes, things like that. And I was going to sell it. I built studio equipment. To sell it, you need a company. So I started to read economy in school. And my friend in the class, he said to me, "Do you know they are looking for an engineer at Polar Studios?" "What is Polar Studios? You never heard about it," I said. And I just said, "A chance in a million that I would get that job." So I went there.
Yes.
And it was under construction, the studio. It was an old cinema. Leif Moses, the manager at that time, pulled me around the studio and said, "This is going to be," like, and asked me a few questions. And then it was a month later, they say, "Can you come to the office, Polar International office," where the manager are. And I met Michael Tretter for the first time, and Stig Anderson, he came with a troupe with people approaching me. And Leif says, my boss, "This is Lennart, he's going to work with us." That's the way I got the news that I was employed.
Yes.
But I was just employed for 3 months to see if I could manage the thing.
Yes.
And we were 3 people starting at the studio. It was 1 studio at that time. So that's the way I got employed. And the reason was another guy had my job, but he worked at another studio, and the manager said, "You will get a higher salary here." So the job, they needed 1 more guy. And because I could do the construction of things, Leif Moses was a constructor of things and rebuilt the studio all the time, I could help. So I think that was a good reason I was employed. And I was a musician, so I could record also, and I've been to studio before.
Now, the modern word for this is multitasking person.
Yes.
Yes, you were a multitasking person. Then, do you remember your first record in the studio? Your
Yes.
first job project?
Yes.
Which was?
Herrgårdskvartetten. They didn't want to put me on a big thing. They tried me on a 2-channel thing. It was 4 people, classical music. And it was just 1 microphone and the tape in and punch in out and then cut with the razor blade, the good parts. It was the first time I used a razor blade on the tape. So the hands were shaking like this because I was nervous then. But the first big album was accordion with an orchestra. We called it old people's music at that time. At that time, this is late 70s. I was 22 years old. The old people, my boss and Michael Tretter, they were the old people. They were 30 years old. So people older than that didn't listen to pop or rock.
Yes.
So at that time, we had something called Melody Radio in Sweden. They played this old kind of Swedish folk music quite boring. And we said, this is grandpa's music or grandma's music. They listen to this kind of music. And I had a whole big orchestra doing this.
Yes.
And I had my group, this symphonical rock group, and I came to the rehearsal and they asked me, what did you record today? Because they know I worked in the studio. What did you say? What did you say? 𝐬𝐭𝐥𝐮𝐧𝐝. That's the old guy who said that. Yes. It was not a good thing to tell what I was recording. Today I'm happy because it was difficult. There was a lot of microphones, a lot of people, things like that. But it was not the fashion of our youngsters and the pop music that we liked. There was a local guy that Björn and Benny produced that I had started to work with, Ted Gärdestad. He's one of the biggest songwriters in Sweden. Yeah. And we started to work. And then there was this kind of Genesis group, Swedish Genesis group, yes, that I started to work with. We talked the same language. And the next thing was Led Zeppelin. So the career went like this. And the rest of the life.
No.
And I got my name on the album, the Led Zeppelin album.
Yes.
And that was important for my career.
Yes, and I'm super interested in this Led Zeppelin album, their last album. And
the last album, but there was one released later called 𝐋𝐤. One of the songs is from the recording of that, and there is a drum solo by John Bonham that was recorded in Switzerland and the rest in Stockholm.
And I'd like to ask you whether if you tell me something more about these sessions with this legendary band, with Led Zeppelin. They are interesting, like persons too. How you worked with them? What was the atmosphere? I know this is the end of the band. This time is the end of the band.
To me, I wasn't a Led Zeppelin fan at that time. It was just a band coming to Sweden and record. And when you record, it's not like going to a concert. I was there early in the morning. The band dropped in Monday to Friday. They dropped in about 1 o'clock. And they, if you compare them with ABBA, that was arranging, testing things, doing things with a new technique and new kind of music. Led Zeppelin rehearsed in England and came as the old-fashioned way, recorded in the studio. So they went around, find their energy, and then they went in 3 takes. And they say, this take. And then they did an overdub with John Paul Jones, either bass or keyboard, whatever he should play. They didn't play on the take.
Yes.
And then at one song I asked Robert Plant, when are we doing the vocals? And he said, was it something wrong with this one? So what's the original take? Something happens when you have the original take. You can see it's like the singer is driving the bus. Otherwise, when you do an overdub, you're not the driver. You sing to the rest of the band, and it's not the same thing. And then it was a lot of work with the guitar solos.
But what's the connection between Led Zeppelin and ABBA? I know there is some connection. What's the connection between them?
In a long way, they got the Polar Prize, but ABBA is not involved with the Polar Prize, so that's not a connection. The connection, why they came to Stockholm?
Yes, and I read that something about one synthesizers and John Paul Jones' interest in it, and I don't know whether it's gossip or it's real.
there was one synthesizer. John-Paul Jones just had one. It's called GX1, a Yamaha GX1 Dream Machine. Was just a few built, I think 15 or something in the whole world, and it was huge. It has 3 or 4. You had pedals and 3 and 4 keyboards and things like that, and amazing lots of oscillators which make a sound, a very fantastic sound. We heard that John-Paul Jones had strings, staccato strings, so it sounded wonderful. So we said to Benny, you must come to the studio and meet John-Paul Jones, and he can play, and so you can see the thing. And John-Paul Jones spoke, and then they said if he could get one GX1 synthesizer, Benny, he would like to have a copy of that song. So we contacted Yamaha in Sweden, that contacted Hamburg Yamaha, and they said, there is one piece left of this synthesizer, the GX1.
Yes.
And you can have it.
Cool.
The price then was about $30,000 or euros. Yeah, then. Today it's a couple of millions.
Yes.
And as the story says, Leif Moses was there. Yamaha said to Benny, you can have it free if we can have one commercial advertisement with you and the synthesizer. And Benny sat quiet and thought about it, and then he said, send the bill. And at that time, we didn't know if ABBA was going to succeed. They had been existing for 3 years as a successful group.
Yes.
And we didn't know if they would succeed or if they continue. So we didn't know about the studio and ABBA and things like that. So when we went into the control room, we heard this thing with Does Your Mother Know? The synthesizer says like a little bit like that. And then Leif says, oh, okay, that synthesizer is paid. And what does he mean? Today I know it was paid.
Today you know that it was paid. And I read that Led Zeppelin were huge fans of ABBA too.
That was a surprising thing, because in Sweden, as a musician doing rock and roll, you were not supposed to like ABBA. The media didn't like ABBA at all.
Really?
No, Swedes were not allowed to like ABBA, and they said it's this bad manager, Stig Anderson, that are fooling people to buy this cheap music.
It sounds so strange.
So, yes, that was the situation.
Yes,
it was
strange.
so bad. So the year after they won this Melody Festival, Eurovision, they cancelled the next year because of that.
Yes.
Because they didn't like the thing. ABBA was the commercial thing, fooling people. So that was the situation that time. And then Robert Plant was in the control room singing ABBA songs and said, they're fantastic songs. But you're rock and roll. Do you like it? Are you joking? No, it's fantastic songs. Listen to them. I couldn't understand then, but yes, he liked ABBA though.
Yes, and maybe there is a little bit the same connection with Genesis or with Phil Collins and Frida, between Phil Collins and Frida. As I know, he's a music producer of her solo album, and after that they came to record Duke in Polar Studio.
They started with Tony Banks, the keyboard player, A Curious Feeling, his solo album, and the producer was ill, so they said, we need a house engineer. So I was the house engineer. I recorded that album. Yes. And then it was followed by Mike Rutherford, his solo album. And the next album after that was Duke. So they recorded 3 studio albums, not with Phil Collins. Phil Collins was on Duke, and then he was producer for Frida. Yes, that's correct.
Do you remember something interesting from your work with this fantastic group? I really love.
I was a symphonic fan. I liked Genesis, Gentle Giant, that kind of groups, and it was an honor to me to record the Curious Feeling, and I started up the other recordings. But I noticed one thing. The thing I thought about how they did when they made their music. I thought they were sitting in the studio and said, we should try to do a musical landscape with the sun bright, like you can translate music into pictures. I thought it was working, and try this and do it like this. But it was mostly like, now we play like this and this and this. So I could every Genesis album and listen to it a lot before. And since then I haven't listened at one album.
Who was the person who then said you'll do it like this, like this?
At the Tony Banks album, it was Tony Banks. But they had prepared before. And the thing, I imagined that they worked like ABBA. They tested everything. Let's do this way, do an overdub like this, what happens? But it was more static. The performance, the song was already created back in England on a demo studio, so it was trying to do it again live. But the funny story with Tony Banks, that Chester Thompson that played the drums, that was playing the drums with Genesis when Phil Collins was singing. He and Tony Banks, they said, is it possible to get a table tennis to the studio? And we had a room there, the table tennis table. And we organized everything, and the crew said, you should see them play table tennis. They are so fast, you can't see the ball between them. It's a so good game. And I played a bit with the crew, and they said to Tony Banks, the engineer can play a game with him. And Swedes are very good at table tennis from school and things. And we started to play, and it took not a long while, and I beat him with 21-2. And I thought, what have I done?
I beat him.
I beat him badly. And they said he thought he was so good. I know another reporter that had talked to him about this, but he don't remember. Either he has tried to forget it, but he said he's playing golf right now.
Not table tennis.
No, table tennis.
Okay, we talk about you said a lot of things about ABBA, but now I want to ask you to tell me something more about your work with them. And it's so interesting that you together recorded the first digitally recorded album. Tell me more about the Visitors and these recordings.
Recording an ABBA digital album, it's not quite true.